Close your eyes and imagine waking up 2,500 years ago. No alarm clock, no notifications, no rush to check the time. Instead, you're stirring to the gentle crow of a rooster echoing across stone walls still cool from the night. The first light of dawn filters through wooden shutters, and somewhere nearby, a clay jar clinks softly as your neighbour draws water from the village well. This isn't the grease of marble statues and epic battles you've seen in movies. This is real life in ancient Greece, and it's far more beautiful than you might imagine. You're not in Athens or Sparta, but in one of hundreds of small city-states scattered like jewels across the Mediterranean coastline, a place whose name history has forgotten, but whose daily rhythms tell the true story of how people actually lived. So what did the ancient Greeks really do all day? How did they wake up, work, worship, and find joy in a world so different from ours, yet surprisingly familiar? Today, we're going to walk through a complete day in ancient Greece, from the moment the sun touches the olive groves to the quiet prayers whispered by lamplight. We'll meet the potter shaping clay with calloused hands, the philosopher questioning everything under the shade of the agora, and the mother teaching her daughter to read the patterns of the stars. This isn't just history. It's a glimpse into a way of life that valued presence over productivity, wisdom over wealth, and the sacred in the everyday. The world stirs before the sun breaks over the Aegean hills. A low mist clings to the olive trees, each branch shaped by centuries of wind and labour. This is where our story begins, not with kings or heroes, but with ordinary people living extraordinary lives. Let's discover what they knew about the art of truly living. The first light of the Aegean sun slips through the shutters, narrow wooden slats held in place by leather straps, and dapples across the worn clay floors of a home not unlike thousands scattered across the Greek world. Inside, the air is still cool, but the promise of heat lingers. The household wakes not with alarm, but with instinct. A woman rises first. Her name is unknown, but her routine is eternal. She lifts herself from a straw-stuffed mattress, gathers her himation over one shoulder, and steps softly toward the hearth. Her bare feet touch ash that's still faintly warm from the night's fire. This hearth is not just for warmth or cooking. It is sacred. It belongs to Hestia, the goddess of home and flame, and each morning it must be tended. She stoops and places a few dried olive branches into the embers. A breath, a flicker. The fire catches. She murmurs a prayer, not aloud, but in the private cadence of familiarity, the kind of prayer that has passed from mother to daughter for generations. Above the hearth, a small clay figurine of Hestia watches from a soot-stained niche. With the fire relit, the day is official. Next comes water, cold, always cold. Carried in ceramic jugs from the communal fountain, it waits in the corner for morning washing. There is no soap, only olive oil and a strigil, a curved blade for scraping the skin clean. The man of the house scrapes dust from his arms, wincing as the chill cuts through his skin. Children stir on the mats. No beds here, just woven fabric, rolled up and stored by day. One child stretches, another clutches a dried fig left from last night's meal. There is no rush, yet everything moves with purpose. Time is marked not by devices, but by rhythm. The warmth of the hearth, the angle of the sun, the sounds of the street beginning to murmur. Breakfast is simple and unchanging. Barley bread dipped in watered wine, perhaps a handful of olives, figs if they are in season, cheese if the goats have been generous. No one expects variety. Food is sustenance, not pleasure, not yet. Outside, the city breathes. The clatter of sandals on limestone grows louder. Neighbours greet each other not with cheer, but with nods, shared labour ahead. The agora will stir soon. The men will go to speak and trade. The women will remain, their world smaller but no less significant. But before that, there is one more act to complete the morning, the libation. From a small jug, wine is poured onto the earth outside the home's threshold. Not much, just a trickle. An offering to the gods, to the dead, to whatever forces might listen. It is both habit and hope, and with that the day begins. However, not all mornings in ancient Greece began the same way. Across the hills beyond the city walls, farmers followed a different rhythm, one set by sun and soil rather than civic obligation. Before dawn fully breaks, a man steps out into the dew-covered fields. His tunic is coarse and worn, tied hastily at the waist. He carries a wooden yoke across his shoulders, buckets of water swaying on either side. The fields, dry from summer's long grasp, drink eagerly when he tilts the pail. Chickens rustle in their coop. A goat bleats in protest as he checks the tether. This too is ritual. He eats standing up. A crust of bread, a wedge of goat cheese, a few olives plucked from a tree he pruned last spring. His fingers were cracked, not from neglect, but from decades of honest labour. He is not poor, just ordinary. Most Greeks were like him, land-bound, God-fearing and consistent. His body carries the memory of seasons the way an old olive tree carries wind in its bark. His wife, already awake, bakes bread in a clay oven. She kneads the dough with practised strength, sprinkling crushed herbs across the top. Her arms glisten with oil and effort. In a nearby basin, she bathes a child with one hand while stirring lentil porridge with the other. Her life, confined largely to the home, is no less structured, no less sacred. She keeps order in a world that often lacks it. Inside the city, in homes wealthier than theirs, the day begins with tutors and scrolls. Sons of citizens are roused by slaves, washed, and taken to lessons in philosophy or mathematics. They are taught how to argue before they are taught how to fight. Their fathers sit in shaded courtyards, discussing politics, measuring each word with care. The luxury of time is a mark of status. But even here, in the homes of the learned, the morning pays homage to the divine. Statues of Athena and Apollo watch from niches in painted walls. Sacred symbols are carved above doorways, worn smooth by the hands of generations seeking protection. Whether peasant or aristocrat, each Greek begins their day not alone, but surrounded. By gods, by duty, by the gravity of tradition. By mid-morning, the sun is high and the streets are alive. Vendors set up their stalls. Boys chase each other through alleyways. Women gather water and stories. The agora begins to buzz. It is in these hours that the city finds its pulse. And yet the essence of the morning lingers. The scent of hearth smoke clings to hair and cloth. Oil from the morning's cleansing still coats the skin. The prayers whispered before breakfast echo in memory. For the ancient Greeks, the morning was more than preparation. It was ceremony. It reaffirmed their place in a cosmos of seen and unseen forces. It was not wasted. It was not rushed. It was lived. Fully, faithfully, and without spectacle. As the sun climbs higher, shadows shorten and intentions sharpen. In some homes, incense is lit. A pinch of myrrh tossed into a brass dish beside the hearth. The scent winds through the house, a reminder that life here is both practical and poetic. Even the ordinary is touched by ritual. A grandmother threads wool beneath the colonnade, humming a melody older than the city itself. A boy watches ants carry breadcrumbs across sun-warmed stone, wondering if the gods ever shrink themselves just to listen. A slave girl steals a moment to sip cool water from a chipped cup before her day resumes. These are not the scenes found in marble or legend. They are not triumphant, not tragic. They are simply true. And in that truth lies the beating heart of Greece, not in its battles, but in its mornings. As the day matures, so too does the tempo of ancient Greek life. The hum of work swells beneath the sun, from fields beyond the city walls to the shaded porticos of the marketplace. Labour was not just a necessity, it was identity. To work was to define one's place in the fragile hierarchy of polis life. In the countryside, the farmer is already bent low. His hands dig into soil that remembers both drought and flood. There is no plough today, only pruning. Vines must be trimmed, weeds uprooted. His back aches, but he hums to himself, a half-remembered hymn to Demeter. His land is modest, but enough. Enough to raise barley, to sell a few amphorae of wine, to offer a small dowry when his daughter comes of age. The animals know the rhythm too. Goats bleat in dusty pens, waiting for a boy to bring out handfuls of feed. Chickens scratch at the sun-hardened ground. A dog sleeps in a patch of shade. In this pastoral scene, nothing is hurried, but nothing is idle. Back in the polis, craftsmen are already at their benches. The potter spins his wheel, shaping clay into a bowl that will hold lentils or perhaps a libation to the gods. His shop smells of earth and fire, of work done with precision and patience. Next door, the bronzesmith hammers a flat sheet into form. Sparks fly. His hands are scarred and blackened, but they are trusted. A soldier has commissioned a new greave, and it must be balanced, beautiful and strong. Across the street, a weaver checks her loom. Threads stretch across the wooden frame like the warp and weft of the cosmos itself. Her fingers move quickly, trained by years of repetition. She works in the open, where women passing by can offer a compliment or a subtle critique. The cloth she weaves today may one day dress a bride. Even those without workshops contribute. Labourers, men with no property but plenty of muscle, carry baskets of limestone to a temple under construction. The foreman shouts, gestures, paces. There is no mercy in the sun's gaze, but there is pride in the sweat. To build something that will outlast your name is not a burden, but a calling. Slavery, too, pulses beneath the surface. It is the unspoken scaffold of Greek society. Slaves work the mills, grind the grain, haul the water. They are not all treated alike. Some are trusted scribes or tutors. Others are punished for even imagined disobedience. Their stories are rarely recorded, but their fingerprints are everywhere. In this world, labour is not an inconvenience. It is how the world breathes. The agora, heart of the polis, swells with movement. Here labour is not performed with tools, but with words and wits. Merchants call out their wares: oil, figs, wool dyed in brilliant purples and saffrons. Their stalls are orderly, though nothing here feels still. Coins clink, buyers haggle. A woman inspects a jar of honey, holds it to the light. A man fingers the edge of a bronze blade, testing its sharpness against the pad of his thumb. Trade is a kind of performance, a dance of persuasion honed by generations. Some sell goods, others sell service. A scribe sits on a low stool, copying a land deed with careful script. He charges by the line, his fingers stained with ink. A man offers lessons in arithmetic under a shaded fig tree. His students, boys of merchant families, count aloud as they trace symbols in the dust. In the afternoon heat, business slows. Sellers retreat into shade. Children nap, but inside homes, labour continues. Women clean fish on stone counters, their knives quick and sure. They rinse lentils, knead dough, prepare meals for men who will return dusty and hungry. Daughters watch, learn, mimic. Their work is the glue of the household, the rhythm that steadies everything else. Domestic labour is neither silent nor secondary. It is filled with talk of neighbours, of gods, of strange dreams. As hands fold linen or sweep the courtyard, minds wander. A neighbour's wife has been to the oracle. A son has not returned from his training. News spreads not through heralds but through gossip, passed from one doorstep to another like sacred fire. Above this busy web of survival and skill, the wealthier elite pursue different kinds of labour. A philosopher paces beneath a colonnade muttering thoughts on justice. He scratches notes into wax tablets, composing arguments that will outlive him. To think is his work. To question his tool. Not everyone understands or values this pursuit, but in Greece, intellect is its own form of labour, a currency of the mind. For others, politics is the day's task. In the assembly, men debate taxation, military campaigns, citizenship laws. Their words are rehearsed, sharpened like blades. It is not performance, it is policy. Their labour shapes the future, one decree at a time. Yet across all roles and ranks, the Greek day holds a quiet unity. The belief that effort, whether with hands, voice, or mind, is divine. The gods themselves worked, Hephaestus at his forge, Demeter in the fields, Athena at her loom. Even Zeus from his throne laboured to maintain cosmic balance. Work was not punishment, it was legacy. And when the day draws near its close, workers of all kinds find their way home, calloused, sun-warmed, fulfilled. The potter wipes clay from his wrists. The merchant tallies coin. The mother folds the last of the linens. Even the slave, if permitted, leans back against cool stone and exhales. They will do it all again tomorrow, and though their names may be forgotten, their labours built the world. As dusk approaches, the final acts of labour unfold like a quiet epilogue to the day's performance. In vineyards beyond the city walls, farmers walk their rows once more, inspecting clusters of grapes with calloused fingers. Some pluck a few ripe ones to bring home, others mark where the harvest must begin soon. In the fading light, the vines seem to shimmer, golden and heavy with promise. Back in town, torches flicker to life. The scent of roasting onions and lamb drifts through narrow streets. Shopkeepers sweep dust from their thresholds. A fishmonger packs crushed ice. Snow brought down from distant peaks over the day's unsold catch. Tomorrow he will try again. Inside the home, meals are laid out on low tables. Families gather not for ceremony but for sustenance. There is little talking at first, just the sound of bread tearing, of olive oil being poured. Eventually voices rise and stories are shared. Whose donkey escaped, whose cousin is joining the navy, whose child recited their letters without error. Evening labour is gentler but no less vital. Coals are banked. Water is poured for cleaning. Elders sit in doorways, carving wood, darning cloaks, humming lullabies. In ancient Greece, work was never just about survival. It was tethered to meaning, to community, to memory. What a person did shaped not only their fate, but their soul. And as the stars begin to prick the sky, the land exhales, quiet, spent, and ready to rest. By midday, the ancient Greek polis is alive with the affairs of the mind and the mechanics of society. Where the morning belonged to bread and toil, the afternoon belongs to voice and reason. Civic life was the fabric that bound free men to one another, and philosophy the loom upon which that fabric was woven. In the shade of the stoa, the long columned walkway that edged the agora, citizens gathered not only to escape the heat, but to engage. Men stood in tight clusters, their hands gesturing as fiercely as their voices rose and fell. They spoke of taxes, naval routes, corrupt officials, and grain imports. Every man had a stake, every voice mattered, at least every free male citizen's voice. Participation in civic life was both privilege and obligation. To vote, to serve on a jury, to speak at the assembly, these were not optional extras but fundamental duties. The Boule, a council of 500 citizens, met daily. Its members rotated frequently, ensuring no man could hold disproportionate sway for too long. Decisions on public works, diplomacy and finance moved through this living apparatus of democracy, fragile and imperfect though it was. Nearby, a boy, perhaps 13, stood beside his tutor. He watched his father argue before a small crowd. The tutor whispered lessons, how to persuade, how to listen, how to speak with logos, ethos and pathos. The boy's future would not be carved by sword or trade, but by words. He would become a citizen by learning how to shape the city's voice. Not far from the agora, in open courtyards or groves of olive trees, philosophy flourished. Here sat Socrates, or men like him. Barefoot, grey-bearded, cloaked in simplicity, he asked questions that seemed at once obvious and impossible. What is justice? What is good? What does it mean to know? Around him, youths in clean tunics shifted uncomfortably, challenged by every answer they gave. Philosophy was not about agreement. It was the art of productive discomfort. Plato might have taught nearby, his students sitting on stone benches, scribbling thoughts into wax tablets. He spoke of forms and shadows, of republics and souls. His ideas would outlive marble statues and temple altars. In Greece, thought itself was a legacy. These thinkers were not separate from civic life. They were its conscience. Philosophers served as gadflies, stinging the state to keep it awake. Sometimes they were honoured, sometimes imprisoned, occasionally, like Socrates, executed. But their role was clear: to question, to probe, to imagine. Philosophy was not confined to elite schools. Even among merchants and farmers, questions of ethics and politics wove through conversations. A man might debate his friend about whether it is right to punish a thief harshly if he stole only to feed his children. A woman might wonder aloud if the gods truly favoured sacrifice, or if they preferred humility. Thought permeated. In the Greek world, civic duty and philosophical inquiry were not opposing paths. They were intertwined roads, walked daily, shaping the soul of a society. Above the city, atop the sacred Acropolis or nestled within other regional centres, temples gleamed with white marble and painted trim. They were not just places of prayer, but architectural affirmations of civic identity. When a new temple was erected, it wasn't simply to honour a god. It was a statement. We are a people who build, who remember, who belong. Civic festivals tied the sacred and the social together. During the Panathenaea, citizens paraded through the city in celebration of Athena. Craftsmen, soldiers, poets, and athletes marched side by side. The poorest man and the wealthiest magistrate shared in the spectacle. At the theatre of Dionysus, the dramas of Aeschylus and Sophocles came alive before an audience that spanned the city's strata. Tragedy taught catharsis. Comedy offered critique. Citizens didn't just consume entertainment, they absorbed values. In these performances one might see the price of hubris, the consequences of betrayal, the subtle complexities of justice. Theatre was education. It was philosophy in motion. Elsewhere, in gymnasia shaded by cypress and plane trees, men trained their bodies while sharpening their minds. wrestling and running were not divorced from thought. They were expressions of arete, excellence. To be fully human, the Greeks believed one must be strong, wise, and engaged. The gymnasium was a space of transformation. Philosophers frequented these spaces as well. A man finishing his morning run might pause to listen to a lecture on ethics. A general might challenge a young student's interpretation of courage. These interactions blurred class lines, if only briefly. For a moment in sweat and thought, all were equals in pursuit of the good. In the symposia held after dark, banquets where wine flowed and minds roamed freely, philosophy took on a more intimate, intoxicating form. Reclining on couches, men passed cups and ideas. Some argued for the immortality of the soul. Others debated the role of fate. A slave poured wine, a lyre hummed softly in the corner, and the city's future thinkers took shape beneath a canopy of stars and questions. But not all voices were welcome. Women, foreigners, and slaves were largely excluded from these civic and intellectual arenas. Their contributions remained in shadows, their wisdom unrecorded. Yet in private, around hearths and courtyards, philosophy still breathed. A mother teaching her daughter how to read the patterns of human behaviour. An old servant sharing the stories of gods with subversive nuance. Thought survived in whispers as well as in speeches. The boundaries of civic life were drawn in law and custom, but philosophy often pushed against those borders, reminding the polis that exclusion carried a cost. That wisdom, like virtue, could arise from unexpected mouths. And so the city pulsed with questions, not just how to rule, but how to live, not just what to build, but what to believe, not just who belongs, but why we matter at all. In this delicate dance of governance and philosophy, the Greeks cultivated more than cities. They cultivated souls. As twilight crept over the city, casting long shadows between the marble columns, civic life did not end. It softened. The courts adjourned, the assemblies emptied. The agora grew still, but thought did not sleep. A father might quiz his son on the speeches heard that day. A philosopher might draft new arguments by lamplight, his wax tablet glowing faintly in the firelight. A craftsman, his tools set aside, might reflect on a passing debate he'd overheard, wondering whether excellence could truly be taught, or whether it had to be born. In homes, discussions murmured beside oil lamps. Was it right to exile a friend for the good of the city? Could a man love his polis more than his family? Even as cloaks were folded and shutters latched, questions lingered like smoke. The city was a cradle of inquiry, and each citizen its child. Even silence in Greece was rarely empty. It was filled with contemplation, with the echo of questions not yet answered. In time, these questions would ripple outward, from Athens to Alexandria, from parchment to printing press. They would inspire revolutions, institutions, and revolts of the mind. But they began here, in sunlit forums and shaded groves, among people who dared to ask not just how the world works, but how we ought to live within it. And in that pursuit their legacy endured, inscribed not only on stone, but within the conscience of the world. To the ancient Greeks, the gods were not distant abstractions perched high in the clouds. They walked among the people, woven into the fabric of daily life. Religion was not something practiced once a week. It was a constant rhythm, pulsing through fields, kitchens, and city squares. At dawn, a householder might whisper a prayer to Hestia, goddess of the hearth, while lighting the morning fire. Her presence was believed to dwell in the flames, protecting the household and binding it in quiet unity. Children learned early to nod respectfully toward the household shrine, often no larger than a loaf of bread. where oil and incense were offered each day. The gods had many faces and many moods. Athena, with her cool intellect and steely gaze, was the protector of cities and wisdom. Poseidon ruled not only the sea but the tremors beneath the earth. Even a small misstep, a broken vow, a spilled offering, could invoke divine displeasure. And so, reverence was layered into everything, from ploughing fields to casting lots at court. Temples rose from city centres like anchors of meaning. Their columns reached toward the heavens, and their marbled friezes sang in stone of battles, myths, and miracles. But these were not empty monuments. They were alive, active sites of worship where priests and priestesses prepared daily rituals, and worshippers brought offerings of grain, wine, or crafted votives. Ritual was the thread that held order together. Before planting a field, before boarding a ship, before marrying a daughter, a sacrifice was made. Sometimes a rooster, sometimes a goat. Rarely, in the oldest days, a human life. Blood was not cruelty, it was communication. It fed the gods who in return granted favour or withheld it. The oracles were the most sacred of intermediaries. At Delphi, the Pythia sat upon her tripod in a fume-filled chamber, inhaling vapours that blurred the edges of the world. Her words were cryptic, her meaning veiled, but her influence stretched across kingdoms. A general might delay war based on her utterances, a merchant might invest or retreat. Her voice was that of Apollo himself, distilled through trembling breath. Yet belief in the gods was not blind. The Greeks did not worship in fear. They worshipped with familiarity. The gods were not perfect. They were flawed, passionate, and deeply human. Zeus could be jealous. Hera could be cruel. Dionysus danced on the edge of madness. And yet, this very fallibility made them relatable. They mirrored the human soul in divine proportion. Even festivals were acts of reverence. The Eleusinian mysteries held in honour of Demeter and Persephone were cloaked in secrecy and awe. Initiates walked a path of purification, fasting and vision. What they saw, they never spoke of. But all who emerged claimed to understand life and death more clearly. The divine was not apart from the world. It was the world whispering through olive branches, glinting from the sea's surface, echoing in the quiet of night. As the sun arced across the sky, the practice of devotion unfolded in public and private with equal gravity. On feast days, entire cities transformed. Roads were swept. Garlands were hung from doorways. Musicians tuned their lyres, and dancers practiced their steps in dusty courtyards. Children rehearsed hymns beneath the watchful eye of a chorus master. These were not merely celebrations, they were sacred contracts. If the gods were honoured properly, prosperity might follow. During the Thesmophoria, women withdrew from the city to honour Demeter, goddess of the harvest. For days they fasted, sang and performed rites far from male eyes. Their rituals were shrouded in mystery, but their purpose was clear: to renew the earth's fertility and ensure the cycle of life continued. Here the feminine divine reigned, silent and sovereign. In the city, altars stood at nearly every turn, at street corners, in marketplaces, beneath trees. Passers-by paused to sprinkle grain or pour libations, simple gestures loaded with reverence. A potter might mutter a blessing to Hephaestus before firing his kiln. A sailor might toss a coin to Poseidon before setting out to sea. Every act of risk and hope had a god to match it. Even sleep was sacred. Dreams were thought to be messages from beyond, filtered through the veils of Morpheus and Hypnos. A man troubled by illness might sleep in the temple of Asclepius, hoping for a vision that would guide his healing. Such incubation rites offered solace where logic failed. Divination took many forms. Augurs studied the flight of birds. Seers examined the entrails of sacrificed animals. Everyday folk read omens in wind, flame, and cloud. Nothing was too small to matter. Every flicker might be a god's whisper. And yet, the Greeks also questioned. Philosophers debated whether the gods were real or merely projections of human fear and wonder. Epicurus suggested that the gods existed but took no interest in human affairs. Others hinted that myth was metaphor, that Olympus was more poetry than place. But even skeptics did not mock. They pondered, they engaged. For belief in Greece was not a monolith. It was a dialogue, a braided thread of ritual, reverence, doubt, and story. In that dialogue, the gods lived not as distant rulers, but as kin. One could argue with them, plead, joke, even rage. And perhaps that is why, thousands of years later, the names of those gods still echo, because they were never meant to be flawless, only close. To be Greek was to live in a world saturated with the divine, where thunder might be Zeus's anger, where a gust of wind might carry Hermes' laughter, where the sacred was not somewhere else, but always and utterly here. And so, beneath the olive trees and within the stone sanctuaries, in whispered prayers and jubilant songs, the Greeks lived with their gods, not above them, but beside them. To be devout was not to withdraw from the world, but to embrace it fully. To see the divine not just in thunder or fire, but in bread, breath, and stars. The gods were not distant. They were home. To understand the ancient Greeks is to know that joy was not an afterthought. Pleasure in its many forms was not only accepted, it was celebrated, woven into the rhythms of life like sunlight on a columned temple. Where duty and devotion carved the shape of a day, delight gave it breath. As the workday waned and shadows lengthened across the agora, the city shifted. Markets quieted, hammers fell still, and the air filled with different sounds. Laughter, lyres, the shuffle of sandals moving toward evening entertainment. For the Greeks, play took many forms. Games of strategy and chance were not reserved for children. Men gathered around small stone tables etched with grids, tossing knucklebones or casting astragali. Games not unlike dice, infused with both luck and lore. They wagered small coins or olives, and while the stakes remained light, the pride was not. Athletics offered a different kind of play, one of strength, sweat, and spectacle. In the dusty courtyards of gymnasia, men wrestled, ran, and hurled discus under the eye of both trainers and the gods. Each movement was a form of worship, a tribute to the ideal of arete, excellence in all things. Young boys, too, trained, their games a rehearsal for the demands of adulthood. In homes and gardens, simpler joys bloomed. Children played with dolls carved from ivory or clay. Girls braided each other's hair and skipped rope made from woven reeds. Boys chased hoops with sticks or staged mock battles with wooden swords, their imaginations as fierce as any Spartan drill master. And music. Music pulsed through every form of Greek leisure. Flutes and lyres accompanied feasts and festivals. Even the hum of a shepherd's tune as he walked among the hills was part of a soundscape as old as the myths. Dance followed close behind. Circle dances in village squares, dramatic reenactments of gods and heroes, movements that told stories when words were too slow. Yet no setting encapsulated Greek pleasure like the symposium. After nightfall, within the homes of the wealthy or the aspirational, men reclined on couches in softly lit rooms. Wine flowed. carefully mixed with water to prolong clarity rather than cloud it. Between sips, conversation blossomed. Poetry was recited, songs were sung, and philosophical debates unfurled like silken thread. Flute girls played, courtesans listened and laughed. The night stretched, rich and thoughtful, indulgent but never crude. Pleasure to the Greeks was not indulgence without measure. It was a cultivated art, a balance between the body and the mind, the sacred and the playful. It honoured joy as a birthright, but never let it spiral into chaos. Play was not just distraction, it was essential, a moment of grace between life's demands. The pleasures of the Greeks extended beyond the human and into nature. A walk through an olive grove was not merely a stroll, it was an act of communion. The rustle of leaves in the breeze, the golden hum of bees, the curve of the earth beneath bare feet, all of it reminded them that the world itself was alive, worthy of attention, even awe. Fishing trips along the coast or rowing out into the Aegean offered escape and reflection. Even those bound to labour found delight in the sea's rhythmic voice. Salt stung their skin, sun warmed their backs. These quiet hours, punctuated by the tug of a net or the flash of a silver fish, gave them something work could not: stillness. At festivals, entire cities turned to celebration. The Dionysia, held in honour of the god of wine and ecstasy, blurred the boundaries of self. Citizens poured into theatres to watch tragedies and comedies that held a mirror to their society. After the final curtain, the revels began, parades, dances, feasts that lasted long into the night. Even humour had its place in the sacred. Aristophanes, through his biting comedies, poked fun at politicians, philosophers, and even the gods. Laughter in these moments became a civic release, a kind of democratic exhale. It reminded Athenians that no one was above scrutiny, not even themselves. Pleasure was democratic in its availability, but not in its equality. The wealthy enjoyed elaborate banquets and expensive perfume, imported silks, and private musicians. The poor made do with roasted figs, a shared flask of wine, and a reed flute. Yet both found joy in the same sky, the same stars, the same stories passed from mouth to mouth in the firelight. Women's pleasures, more private, were no less profound. They sang lullabies, shared jokes at communal wells, painted their eyes with crushed minerals and perfumed their hair with oils of rose and myrrh. In marriage feasts and harvest dances, they found freedom in fleeting rituals. Their joy was often quieter, but it pulsed with its own current. And then there were the stories. In marketplaces and meadows, by lamplight and moonglow, tales were told, of heroes and monsters, of clever girls and boastful kings, of gods who wept and men who dared too much. These stories were a kind of play too. They transported the listener beyond toil and into wonder. Each tale was a window, each listener a child again. To be Greek was not only to survive, but to savour. In games, in stories, in feasts and flirtation, the Greeks danced with life itself, never letting it pass without a toast, a laugh, or a song. Their pleasures were not escapes, they were affirmations. That joy was holy, and life, however brief, was worth the celebration. So when the stars blinked awake above stone rooftops, and the city exhaled the hush of night, a final kind of play began. Rest. Children curled beside hearths, still giggling over a riddle told hours ago. Lovers whispered on open terraces, sharing the last warmth of day beneath woven blankets, the scent of myrtle on the breeze. The old closed their eyes, dreaming not of battles or burdens, but of olive trees, laughter, sunlit courtyards, and distant lyres. Play, the Greeks knew, was not merely an interlude between duties. It's the soul's own song, sung softly, joyfully, into the wide and listening dark. When the sun dipped below the marble ridges and the world turned bronze in the final light, the pace of ancient Greece softened. Nightfall was not feared, it was welcomed. The transition from light to dark carried its own rituals, its own rhythms, a final act in the grand play of the day. Shadows lengthened across courtyards where pots still held the warmth of the day. The scent of herbs from evening meals lingered in the air, oregano, garlic, and a hint of honeyed figs. With the cooling wind came the closing of shutters and the soft call of mothers gathering their children. In city homes the hearth flickered low. Oil lamps were lit with practised ease, their amber glow bouncing off plaster walls and clay pottery. It was a time for quiet, though not necessarily for silence. Families might sit close and speak in hushed tones, recounting stories of the day or reciting the myths passed down like heirlooms. These were stories meant not to excite but to settle the heart. The wealthy reclined longer in their courtyards or inner chambers, sometimes accompanied by soft music or a lingering guest. They nursed diluted wine and considered the stars. Their thoughts might drift toward the day's fortunes, or to Plato's reflections on the soul, or a lover's whispered promise. Sleep was not rushed. The body wound down as the night stretched on. One by one the lamps were snuffed. In the dark, prayers rose to Hypnos, god of sleep, and to Morpheus, shaper of dreams. Offerings, a sprig of lavender, a murmured word, a final gesture, signalled the day's surrender. In the countryside the night unfolded with even greater stillness. Farmers lay on straw-stuffed mattresses, listening to the cricket's hymn and the gentle shift of animals in the barn. Stars spilled overhead in greater clarity, and the silence felt thick and familiar. Even the dogs, after a low bark or two, settled into deep watchful rest. The streets, once bustling, now emptied. The flicker of torches marked the steps of a few night watchmen. Their silhouettes passed across walls like ghosts of duty, keeping the peace while the city slept. Elsewhere, only the sound of distant waves or rustling cypress reminded the world that time still moved. For the Greeks, sleep was not an escape, it was a return to the self, to the gods, to dreams that sometimes felt more real than the waking day. In the hush of night they found something eternal, not just rest, but renewal. In the mountain villages and island hamlets, the rituals of nightfall took on their own rhythm. The thrum of the day faded, replaced by the lull of lullabies, and the scent of smoke curling from a hearth now banked for morning. Elders, wrapped in woven cloaks, sat by doorways and watched the constellations rise one by one. They knew the names of every star and the stories stitched into the sky. Orion hunting across the heavens, the Pleiades fleeing forever. In homes large and small, bedding was simple but sacred. Straw pallets, wool blankets, and stuffed linen supported the limbs that had laboured through sun and sweat. Even in cities like Athens, famed for their noise and debate, the onset of sleep brought a universal pause. Merchants, scholars, slaves, and sculptors alike turned inward, each to their breath, each to their dreams. Children often fell asleep to stories, tales of Heracles and his labours, or Persephone and the seasons, or clever Odysseus weaving through trick and tide. These were not only bedtime tales, these as blueprints of courage, cunning and consequence. Passed from tongue to ear, they shaped the souls of future philosophers, farmers and warriors. The night time also served the poets and thinkers. While most slumbered, some remained awake, penning verses by lamp glow or meditating under the stars. Pythagoreans believed sleep was a window into the cosmos, that through dreams the soul could glimpse eternal truths. For them, dreams were not idle fancies but sacred maps. Temples, too, did not sleep. In sanctuaries devoted to Asclepius, the god of healing, the sick lay on mats in hope of receiving divine visions. These sleep rites, called incubation, were acts of faith and surrender. A dream might reveal a cure, a message, a path to peace. Not all nights were tranquil, of course. Storms roared across the Aegean, thieves prowled alleyways, lovers slipped from balconies. Yet even these dramas bowed to the rhythm of darkness, a theatre stage with only moonlight as spotlight and cicadas as chorus. What made the Greek night singular was its invitation, not merely to rest, but to reflect. The day's debates, labours, pleasures and fears gently unravelled. In the quiet a person could find themselves again, not as citizen, soldier or spouse, but as soul, as part of something vast and humming. And when sleep finally arrived, whether sudden as thunder or slow as wine, it carried them across the boundary, into dream, into myth, into the place where the gods still wandered and the world held its breath until morning. And so, the Greek night became not just a time of rest, but a mirror held up to the soul. Across the land, from the smoky megarons of Mycenae to the marbled porches of Athens, bodies slowed, but thoughts wandered. Some dreamed of homecomings, of heroes returned in triumph. Others floated through labyrinths of memory, where lost loved ones smiled and the voices of gods echoed like wind over water. Farmers dreamed of full harvests. Mothers dreamed of children grown strong. Sailors, even in sleep, felt the phantom roll of waves beneath them, while soldiers on leave still clenched phantom swords in their slumber. The sacred silence of night gave each soul a passage, an unseen boat across a sea of forgetting and remembering. Each breath in the dark was a thread connecting them to generations past, who had once stared at the same constellations, whispered the same prayers, and drifted into the same ancient rest. This, too, was a kind of worship. Sleep was not a death. It was a return to the womb of the world, and in that silence Greece endured, not in monuments or myths alone, but in the hush between heartbeats, in the peace of one more night survived. Until the next dawn, when the world would stir again. As the last embers of the day fade and the hush of sleep takes hold, one cannot help but wonder, what remains? What lingers from those ancient days? The people of ancient Greece, farmers and thinkers, mothers and priests, children chasing sunlit dust, are long gone. Their voices have quieted, their temples have crumbled, their olive trees perhaps still bear fruit, but the hands that planted them are dust. And yet, something persists. In every question we ask about the world, in every moral puzzle we try to solve, in every attempt to capture beauty through art or word or movement, there echoes something distinctly Greek. Not because they were the first or the wisest or the best, but because they paused, they looked, they asked, and in asking they carved something permanent into the soft clay of time. They lived close to the edge of the divine and the mortal, and they knew it. They built cities not just of stone, but of ideas. They farmed, but also wondered why seeds grew. They fought, but also questioned what justice meant. They danced and feasted, but paused to ask whether joy had a purpose beyond pleasure. Even in their simplest tasks there was philosophy woven into the folds. That perhaps is their truest legacy. We remember their myths and columns and tragedies, yes, but also their gaze, their ability to look at life with reverence, curiosity, and a deep sense of belonging. They didn't always have the answers, but they believed in the worth of the question. And so, as we lie in our own quiet rooms, eyes heavy with sleep, we drift not just into dreams, but into continuity. We become one more thread in the tapestry of time, winding through centuries of longing, laughter, labour and light. Somewhere, across the millennia, a potter smooths the rim of a vessel in fading light. A child laughs as waves lap at marble steps. A philosopher scratches a thought into wax, and we, breathing slowly in the dark, carry their memory forward. Not in stone or song, but in the very act of reflecting. What did the Greeks do all day? They lived. And in living they left behind a quiet, eternal echo. It calls to us still. Even now we mimic them without knowing. In our rituals, our morning walks, shared meals, whispered prayers or thoughtful silences, we echo their rhythms. When we pause beneath the stars and wonder not just how they shine, but why we are drawn to them, we speak the same ancient tongue of awe. Perhaps that's why their legacy endures not only in ruins or scrolls, but in the unspoken places of our lives, in gardens and classrooms, in debates and lullabies, in the ways we grieve, hope, and rebuild. To study the lives of the ancient Greeks is to hold up a mirror, not to see how we are different, but how deeply alike we have always been. They remind us that the ordinary can be sacred, that the day's small moments, shared bread, a question asked, a shadow noticed, are the soil from which timeless meaning grows. And so, as the chapter closes and the night draws near, let this not be an end but a return, to wonder, to presence, to the quiet knowing that like them we are part of something vast, something eternal. If you've made it this far, thank you for journeying with me through the quiet rhythms of ancient Greek life. In every sunrise they greeted, every olive they pressed, every question they pondered beneath the stars, the ancient Greek showed us that a meaningful life is not built solely on grand deeds, but on deep presence within small moments. Their days were simple, but never empty, and through them we glimpse our own. If this story soothed you, sparked your curiosity, or simply helped you rest, consider supporting the channel. A like, a comment, or even a subscription helps us continue exploring these forgotten corners of history through gentle storytelling. Tell me in the comments what you'd like to hear next. What stories whisper to you across time? Your support allows us to craft stories that calm the mind and stir the soul. Whether you're drifting off in silence or listening on a quiet walk, you're part of this growing community of dreamers and wanderers through time. Until next time, sleep well beneath the stars.